This chapter will discuss personality and psychodynamic theories, humanistic theories and trait theories, as well as social cognitive theories and the self. A lot of the chapters prior to this kind of touched on um, biological influences on the personality, personality development throughout your lifespan, right? This chapter focuses on personality itself and what it is that researchers study, why they study, how researchers study it. So, what is personality? Um, Now, when I think about this, I'm like, there's so many different theorists. According to the book, it's an individual's characteristic pattern of thinking, feeling, and acting. It refers to the way someone behaves. The study of personality focuses on two broad areas. One is understanding individual differences in particular personality characteristics like social ability or irritability. The other is understanding how the various parts of a person come together as a whole. Now, psychodynamic theory is the posit that behavior is dynamic interaction between the conscious and the unconscious mind. And the unconscious is one of the most powerful effects on behavior and emotion. No behavior is without cause and therefore determined, right? So, childhood experiences greatly affect emotions and behaviors as adults. So, some examples of some examples of behaviors and their explanations using the psychodynamic theory would be nail biting may be caused by anxiety inducing childhood events. um, Skin picking is a compulsion that would be linked to developmental trauma, or sexual compulsions or related sexual behavior issues are linked at the sexual development stage using the psychodynamic perspective. So those things are done and without even like having an idea. So you can see how the psychodynamic theory works and how this theory can be used to explain behaviors and actions. So when we think about like really famous people, like maybe Jay Z or um, maybe singers like Lady Gaga, Janet Jackson, Michael Jackson, things like that. Very famous celebrities. I can't think of anybody's name right now, but when you think about that, Freud was like a rock star of the psychology field. To be honest, um, his influences not only linger in psychology and clinical psychology, but also in film and literature and things like that. It's funny, you'll hear people use ego and repression and Freudian slips and fixation and things like that, and you're like, oh snap, especially if you major in psychology or take psychology classes, those terms all came from Freud, and Sigmund Freud was just a product of his time. He believed that psychological troubles resulted from men's and women's unresolved conflicts with their expected roles. He observed patients whose disorders had no clear physical explanations. He also concluded that problems reflected unacceptable thoughts and feelings hidden away in the unconscious mind. Um, our conscious awareness is like the part of the iceberg that floats above the surface. Beneath this awareness is a larger unconscious mind with its thoughts, wishes, feelings, and memories. Some of these thoughts we store temporarily in our preconscious, from which we retrieve them in the conscious awareness. Of greater interest to Freud was the mass of unacceptable passions and thoughts that he believed we repress or forcibly block from our consciousness because they would be too unsettling to acknowledge. And I got that straight from the book. But yeah, so psychologists have used the iceberg image to illustrate Freud's idea. Um, And unlike the parts of the frozen iceberg, however, the id, ego, and the superego interact. And we'll get into that a little bit later. So these are some terms that you can learn. You can, I would suggest you write them out. They start on page 528 of the text. I would learn these. I want to talk a little bit about free association. Free, so we've all heard of hypnosis, right? So I always think about when I think of hypnosis, I think of the movie Get Out, and when the lady kind of takes her spoon around the cup and, takes the guy into the sunken place, is all, that movie's crazy. But anyways, so Freud was trying hypnosis. He had failed attempts. So he came up with free association. And basically he had the patient there, and he would have them relax and say whatever came to their mind. No matter how embarrassing, no matter how trivial, he assumed that a line of mental dominoes had fallen. Sometimes during free association, patients would have unconscious memories, often painful childhood memories that could be retrieved, reviewed, and released essentially from that client. And I just think it's pretty interesting, especially when it comes to the conscious, the preconscious, and the unconscious. So if you go back, I know I talked a little bit about the iceberg, but with the conscious awareness, it's like the part of the iceberg that floats above the surface. Beneath this awareness is a larger unconscious mind with its thoughts, its wishes, memories, things like that. And some of these thoughts we store temporarily in the preconscious area from which we can retrieve them into the conscious awareness. So Freud believed that with or without awareness, these troublesome feelings and ideas powerfully influence us. And it affects the way that we act, our daily habits, things like that. So I would take take the time to write out, all of these terms, learn these terms for the exam. So Freud believed that personality resulted from your mind's three systems: the id, ego, and the superego. Now, the id, when just to kind of put it in layman's terms, right? The id is trying to get you to do things like eat cake and not go jogging, right? It's satisfying basic drives, right? Basic drives to survive, reproduce, and digress, right? So the id is trying to get you to do things like eat cakes and not go jogging, and the super ego is trying to get you to make good decisions and be an upstanding person. So it's making you operate in moral consciousness. Okay. And the ego, so it and the super ego are always fighting with each other, and the ego steps in between the two. So the ego mediates between the id and the super ego. So ego operates on the reality principle. It contains, thoughts, judgments, perceptions, things like that. So it is trying to get you to do the things that satisfy you. Super ego is going to then focus on those things like moral consciousness, but the ego is the mediator between the two. So Freud believed that children pass through 5 psychosexual stages: oral, anal, phallic, latency, and genital. During the oral stage, the infant's primary source of interaction occurs through the mouth. So the rooting and sucking reflexes especially important. The mouth is vital for eating, and the infant derives pleasure from oral stimulation through gratifying activities like tasting and sucking. The primary conflict at this stage is the weaning process. The child must become less dependent upon caretakers. If fixation occurs at this stage, Freud believes the individual would have issues with dependency or aggression. Oral fixation can result in problems with drinking, eating, smoking, or nail biting. In the anal stage, this is from about the age of 1 to 3, 18 months to 36 months. During the anal stage, Freud believed that the primary focus of the libido was on controlling bladder and bowel movements. The major conflict at this stage is toilet training. The child has to learn to control their bodily needs. Developing this control leads to a sense of accomplishment, independence. Freud believed that positive experiences during the toilet training stage serve as the basis for people to become competent, productive, and creative adults. The phallic stage is from 3 to 6 years old. Freud suggests that during the phallic stage, the primary focus of the libido is on the genitals. At this age, children also begin to discover differences between males and females. There's the Oedipus complex. It describes the feelings of wanting to possess the mother and the desire to replace the father. However, the child also fears that he will be punished by the father for those feelings, so Freud termed that castration anxiety. The Electra complex has been used to describe similar feelings experienced by girls. Freud, however, believed that girls instead experience penis envy. So eventually the child begins to identify with the same-sex parents as means of vicariously possessing the other parent. For girls, however, Freud believed that penis envy was never fully resolved and that all women remain somewhat fixated on this stage. Latency is from 6 to puberty. During this stage, the superego continues to develop while the its energies are suppressed. Children develop social skills and relationships with peers and adults outside the family. As with the psychosexual stage, Freud believed that it was possible for children to become fixated or stuck in this phase. Fixation at this stage can result in immaturity and inability to form fulfilling relationships as adults. The genital stage is the onset of puberty. So during the final stage of the psychosexual development, the individual has sexual interest in the opposite sex. This stage begins during puberty, but can last throughout the rest of the person's life. If the other stages have been completed successfully, the individual should now be well balanced, warm, and caring. Teens in the genital stage of development are able to balance their most basic urges against the need to conform to the demands of reality and also social norms. So, for Freud, anxiety was the product of tensions between the demands of id and superego, right? So, regression is another well-known defense mechanism. Repression acts to keep information out of the conscious awareness. But what is a defense mechanism? A defense mechanism basically functions indirectly and unconsciously to keep disturbing or threatening thoughts from becoming conscious, right? So, for example, a person who has repressed memories of abuse suffered as a child may later have difficulty forming relationships. So the main difference between repression and regression is repression when a feeling is hidden or forced from the consciousness to up to the unconscious because it's seen as socially unacceptable. Now, regression is a little bit different. It's basically falling back into an earlier state of mental or physical development, seen as a less demanding and safer place. So a retreat to an earlier developmental stage. And these are other defense mechanisms. We talked about regression, but we didn't talk about reaction formation, and that's basically a psychological defense mechanism in which a person goes beyond denial and behaves in the opposite way to which he or she thinks. Conscious behaviors are adopted to then overcompensate for the anxiety a person feels regarding their socially unacceptable unconscious thoughts or emotions. Um, for example, a mother who bears an unwanted child, for example, may react to her feelings of guilt for not wanting um, wanting the child by becoming like extremely um, just overprotective, just to convince both the child and herself that she's a good mom. So just kind of acting totally different than that, switching that unacceptable into something positive, right? So here it says repressing angry feelings, a person displays exaggerated friendliness, right? So another one is projection, and it refers to unconsciously taking unwanted emotions or traits you don't like about yourself and attributing them to someone else. A common example is a cheating spouse who suspects their partner is being unfaithful. Um, so that's another one to think about. And rationalization is a defense mechanism, um, and often it's a controversial behavior, feelings. They try to justify them and explain in a seemingly rational or logical manner to avoid the true explanation of what's actually going down. So a habitual drinker says she drinks with her friends just to be sociable. um, Displacement is a psychological defense in which a person directs a negative emotion from its original source to a less threatening recipient. A classic example of the defense is displaced aggression. And then we got denial. It's basically refusing to believe what's happening. So Anna Freud basically proposed that it's the refusal to accept reality, blocking external events from awareness. So if a situation is just too much to handle, the person may respond by refusing to perceive it or denying that it exists. So a partner denies evidence of his loved one's affair. So those are just some of the defense mechanisms that may be on the exam. So I will check them out, read over them. They're really cool, and you actually notice these maybe in family members and friends and things like that. Individuals. I've actually seen people project, and also where individuals displace anger, and not necessarily handle it in the way that they should. So it's this social psychology and personality are totally fun chapters. I love them both. They're like the best chapters in the book, at least in my opinion. So over time, after Freud came up with the psychosexual um, theories, there were Neo-Freudians, and the Neo-Freudians were psychologists whose work basically followed a lot of Freud's ideas. They generally agreed with Freud that childhood experiences matter, but they started to decrease the emphasis on sex and focus more on the social environment and effects of culture on personality and things like that. Um, but there's also individuals who um, are uh, who reject Freud's emphasis on sexual motivation, and many believe species shared evolutionary history, um, and also they view mental life as primarily the unconscious, and contend that childhood social experiences influence adult personality and attachment patterns. It's um, like I said, um, a lot of them took out the sex, but just wanted to focus on the social and cultural aspects of the psychoanalysis over the biological. So when it comes to assessing unconscious processes, they use a couple of different types of tests to test those things, and they use the projective test, and they are a set of ambiguous stimuli such as the ink blot or incomplete sentences, and the individual responds with the first thought or series of thoughts that come to mind, or tells a story about each one of the stimuli. The thematic apperception test is a form of a projective test, and it was initially, it's a widely used test for children and also adults. It's designed to reveal an individual's perception of interpersonal relationships. So there's 31 picture cards, and they serve as stimuli for stories and descriptions about relationship or social situations. Rorschach is also a projective test. It was developed in 1921 by Herman Rorschach to measure thought disorder for the purpose of identifying mental illness. It was inspired by the observation that schizophrenia patients often interpret the things they see in unusual ways. It's the most widely used projective test. It also attempts to address low reliability and validity in most areas addressed with research-based or computer-aided tools. So some who use this test are confident that the interpretation of the ambiguous stimuli will reveal unconscious aspects of the test taker's personality. So as you can read here, a lot of the modern research contradicts many of Freud's ideas. Freud's take on defense mechanisms, no one can really say much about that. It still definitely holds relevance. Few people, including psychologists, would deny that we all too regularly employ such defenses as denial, repression, projection, rationalization. Ultimately, Freud's modern contributions apply more to attitudes than actual therapeutic methods. Though this is not a bad thing, he established foundations that modern mental health care are built off of, and even though he's criticized, there are a lot of things that at least he kind of started so that research could continue. And yeah, so a lot of the mental health care process certainly seemed to stem from his main thesis statement as to what patients should be getting out of therapy, which simply put is know thyself. So yeah, of course there's going to be a lot of things that contradict him, but there's a lot of things, of course, that he has done to influence therapy and the science and psychology. So Abraham Maslow's self-actualizing person. So we are turning now to humanistic theories. As a leader of humanistic psychology, Abraham Maslow approached the study of personality by focusing on subjective experiences, so free will and the innate drive to self-actualization. Maslow's hierarchy of needs ranked human needs from the most basic physical need to the most advanced need of self-actualization. So people are motivated by hierarchy of needs and strive for that self-actualization, knowing who they are, the self-transcendence. Carl Rogers, he started developing person-centered therapy in the 1940s. This type of therapy diverged from the traditional model of therapist as the expert and moved instead toward a non-directive, empathetic approach that empowers and motivates the client in the therapeutic process. And you'll see a lot of therapists actually using this approach these days, currently. Now, the humanistic psychologists sometimes assess personality using questionnaires to evaluate self-concept, but then some rejected the standardized assessments and relied on actually talking to the person, the conversation, establishing the rapport. Rogers sometimes used questionnaires in which people described their ideal and actual selves, which later was used to judge progress during therapy as well. Humanistic theories influenced counseling, child raising, management. It offered a new set of values for approaching and understanding human nature, human condition. It expanded the horizon of how we study humans, and it also offered a broader range of more effective methods and professional practice of psychotherapy. But there's also, of course, going to be individuals who criticize, uh, humanistic theory. Rogers and Maslow placed little value on scientific psychology, especially the use of psychology laboratories to investigate um, both human and animal behavior, so it could present a vague and subjective concept. It also Humanism rejects scientific methodology like experiments. So it kind of offers that naively optimistic assumption. Um, they didn't use a lot of research to be able to go into depth in the ways that people think or how they feel. So they didn't really use any case studies. So trait theorists are primarily interested in the study of human personality. Um, they look at those habitual patterns of behaviors, thoughts, and emotions. Um, Now, Freud said, Alport taught me that, um, or meeting Freud, Alport said, and this according to the text, taught me that for all its merits may plunge, or psychoanalysis may plunge too deep, and that psychologists would do well to give full recognition to manifest motives before probing the unconscious. Alport came to define personality in terms of identifiable behavior patterns. He was concerned less with explaining individual traits than with actually describing them.
All right, so we're continuing to explore traits. One way of classifying people um, as having one or another distinct personality type just basically fails to capture the full individuality of that individual. That's why we have the factor analysis. Um, with the factor analysis, what it does is it's basically a technique that's reduced to that reduces a large number of variables into fewer number of variables or factors, right? Um, it's one of those techniques that that basically identifies and clusters items to tap basic components of like intelligence, right? So when you think about the Einzig, I think I have to figure out how to say that one, but it is an instrument that looks at extroversion in different dimensions of the personality. This instrument is actually comprised of 57 yes or no items and yields total scores for extroversion and neuroticism, as well as a validity score. So, extroversion and emotionality factors inevitably emerge as basic personality dimensions. Sorry, my kids screaming. Um, so that is the factor analysis. So, uh, with the two personality dimensions, um, Isaac he wanted to look at um, two personality factors, right? So we got extroversion, introversion, and then also instability and stability. So if you're looking at this, I mean, there's two axes, kind of looks like the north, south, east, west, and you can kind of, it just depending on the person, they can fall in one area of the dimension, but they could be considered, you know, extroverted but stable, but extroverted or unstable. It just kind of depends on that individual. So there's varying combinations. Um, Here it shows you two different individuals, Jane Goodall, who can be seen as a natural introvert, and then you have, you know, Stephen Colbert, who can be seen as a natural extrovert. Okay, being considered an extrovert is like an an amazing thing, and 87% of Westerners want to be extroverted because if you see like different characters, superheroes, different people on television, they typically are seen as extroverted. I feel like nowadays, though, some of the like investigation shows, some of the shows, they're actually showing individuals who are introverted, and they are actually very powerful characters as well. But for let's just go think about back in the day, you know, 10 years ago when you were watching cartoons, you typically saw that extrovert um, who, and that person was beautiful and they were talented. Oftentimes, introversion is seen as, introversion is not shyness, but it's often seen as being someone being shy. Introverts just seek lower levels of stimulation from their environment. You would never believe that I'm an introvert, but there are times when I would prefer lower levels of stimulation. Like I would much rather just hang out with my husband, be able to recharge, you know. But when I want to be social, I do want to be social. But when you're an introvert, it has a lot of benefits. Um, introvert Introverted leaders outperform extroverted leaders, um, such as when their employees voice new ideas and challenge existing norms. It also says that many introverts flourish, including Abraham Lincoln, Mother Teresa, and Gandhi. So those, I mean, I guess someone found out that they were introverts. So, but you know, they're oftentimes introversion is seen as being shy, and that those individuals are passive and things like that. No, they just would like lower levels of stimulation. They don't need all the people. They don't need all the action around them. And here it says, for example, when given lemon juice, introverted people salivate more than extroverted people. Oh, cool. I didn't know that. So we learned something. We both learned this today. We've already talked about the stigma of introversion, being misunderstood as shyness, but we've also talked about just biology in general, biology and just who we are and how strong that is. Typically, our biology does influence our personality in other ways. Just they did a twin study, um, an adoption, a twin and adoption study, and we know how that came out. The twins had similar personalities, even not living, even though they didn't live in the same location, same house, weren't raised the same, but they had very similar personalities. So, you know, genes play a huge part in temperament and just behavioral style in general. In this course, you took the Keirsey temperament or personality inventory, which was very short, but there are other inventories. The MMPI, which has been translated in 100 plus languages. It says in the text that people can fake their answers to create a good impression, and the ease of computerized testing may lead to the misuse of tests. However, if someone like sincerely wants to know what their personality is like, they, you know, if they answer the questions truthfully, it should be able to gauge, you know, the feelings and their behaviors to determine the type of personality that they have. And I believe some jobs actually will, I think it's Walmart. Let me make sure. I'm going to actually Google that. But I believe Walmart makes you take some sort of personality. Um, yeah, they make you take a personality test. It's called the Walmart assessment test. So some people actually don't even pass the Walmart assessment test, but I bet you, um, just like it says, you can like fake you can fake your personality. So essentially, if you're taking the test and being completely honest, then you know that you aren't sociable and you're not agreeable or whatever. It may cause you to fail because people actually fail and aren't considered for an interview. So, but yeah, we have, Isaac, um, the introversion, extroversion, stability, instability dimensions. They're super important, but they don't often tell the whole story. So a lot of theorists and researchers have been using the self-report inventories and peer reports to just assess the score for those individuals on the Big Five personality traits. Now, when it comes to uh, the Big Five factors, the acronym is CANOE, so it stands for conscientiousness, agreeableness, neuroticism, openness, extroversion. And we'll get into describing what they all are in the next few slides. Memory tip is just to be able to picture the word canoe, or actually picture a canoe in general. Here on this picture, kind of shows you like what that looks like, right? So when it comes to conscientiousness, it's a tendency to display like self-discipline, act dutifully, strive for achievement. Um, they're typically prepared. They pay attention to details. They like order, things like that. When it comes to agreeableness, which would be the second part of the canoe, right? It reflects an individual difference in general concern for like social harmony. They're typically trustworthy, generous individuals. Um, like you would hear them, they would say things like, "I'm interested in people, like hanging out with people." They take time out for others. They make people feel comfortable. So neuroticism is right in the middle, right? Um, it's the tendency to experience negative emotions such as anger, anxiety, depression. So what they typically um, typically individuals who who um, take the test or the assessment for neuroticism, they'll say things like, "I get irritated easily, I get upset easily, I worry about things." Okay. Now, when it comes to openness, that's a little bit different than neuroticism, right? So, um, individuals who are open to experience, they love adventure, they have great imaginations, they just love um, just to find out more about things. Um, and typically they have excellent ideas. They're interested in just finding out new information. So it's pretty cool. And then we have extroversion, right? And so extroversion is characterized by breadth of activities. Um, Extroverts enjoy interacting with people, perceived as full of energy. They possess high group visibility. They like to talk. So they can tend to be the life of the party. Those that are starting conversations, and just typically very comfortable around people. So the Big Five research questions, they've explored, many just to make sure that I guess the test is valid. But they're saying, how stable are these traits? And they learn that pretty much personality continues. Um, it continues to develop, and it definitely changes through late adulthood and adolescence. It's in the text. It says, up to the age of 40, we show signs of maturity principle. We become more conscientious and agreeable, and less emotionally unstable. How heritable are they? Heritability uh, generally runs about 40% for each dimension. Many genes, each having small effects, combine influence. Two are traits. Do traits reflect differing brain structure? It actually says those who score high on conscientiousness tend to have larger frontal lobes. Do these traits reflect birth order? Um, and I don't think that's on here, but how well well, do these traits reflect birth order? After controlling for other variables, looking at like the size of your family, um, where you fall as far as like birth order, um, firstborn children tend to be a lot more agreeable, more conscientious individuals. And then you'll read over these, of course, but do the big five traits predict our actual behaviors? Yeah. If people report being outgoing, conscientious, they typically are telling the truth. So, especially if they answer truthfully, right? Like it doesn't work if you're not. So, on page 547, it might be kind of cool, if you found out like where you fail, found out where you fail. That sounds weird. As far as the big five, um, self-assessment is concerned. So I would definitely push for you to take the assessment. It's pretty cool. It's pretty short, so it won't take a lot of your time. Um, but I think it could tell you a lot about yourself, maybe. Okay, so just because we have a certain type of disposition or personality, uh, and research has shown that personality traits are typically stable across different situations. The only thing is just certain situations, certain moments that may affect someone powerfully, they may not respond or act in based on their personality, right? But for the most part, it is very stable. But there are times when it isn't. So it can definitely personality traits are predictors of mortality, divorce, the type of job that you choose, um, consistency of specific behaviors from one situation to another is weak. But typically, their average behaviors are predictable. The way your personality is wired is pretty much stable across the board. Graph is just showing how, as you become older, your personality becomes more stable. Um, with the social cognitive perspective, he basically thinks that we learn a lot of our behaviors through conditioning and through imitating others. That's like the social part of it, which kind of goes against a lot of people, especially when they say that genetics plays a huge role in how or what type of personality. So biology and personality just showing that it does influence the way that we are, the way that our personalities are kind of molded. So our temperament and all that stuff. That's what they said initially from if you go back in the chapter. So um, with the social cognitive in Bandura, he thought that it was a little bit different. That we imitate, that we are learning from our environment. Determinism describes the interaction of mutual influence of behavior. Um, Albert Bandura states that a person's behavior both influences and is influenced by personal factors in the social environment. Bandura accepts the possibility that an individual's behavior may be conditioned through the use of consequences. So, an example would be maybe a child acting out in school. The child doesn't like going, therefore they act out. So, each behavioral and environmental factor coincides with the child, not the child acting out in school. There's not really one way to describe, personality. Is it just, your cultural, your social influences? Is it psychological? I think it takes, just based on this figure, it takes a bit of everything. So it's looking at the biological, so your brain activity, your genes, psychological, those learned responses from situations, the social, cultural, so the social support, those cultural expectations, those things kind of mold our personalities. Okay, there's another, or there's plenty of theorists, but social cognitive theorists, a lot of times they build on concepts of learning and cognition. Um, the only thing a lot of people kind of um, just criticize is the fact that they focus so much on the situation that they don't really look at the inner traits. Where's the person in this view of personality and things like that. Um, but they contend the best way to predict the behavior in a given situation is to actually observe that person in the situation. We've heard self-esteem, self-efficacy. Um, so our self-esteem is our feeling of self-worth, um, how we feel about who we are and things like that. Um, Sometimes one's feeling of high or low self-worth, it may not be great, right? Self-efficacy is our sense of our competence on a task, um, and our effectiveness as well. High self-esteem correlates with less pressure to conform, um, with persistence at difficult tasks, and with happiness. But um, the thing about it is, individuals, but is high self-esteem the horse or the cat? Is it really the armor that protects kids from life problems? Is it, so you can, are you, just because you have self-esteem, do you have self-efficacy? A lot of people wonder that. Um, there is, however, an important effect of low self-esteem when researchers temporarily deflated people's self-image, um, like telling people they did poorly. Those participants became more likely to disparage others or to express heightened racial prejudice, which is really interesting. So other researchers showed that giving people random rewards hurt their productivity. So when good things occurred that weren't earned, like nickels coming out of a slot machine, it did not increase people's well-being. It produced helplessness. People basically became helpless, helpless or passive. Optimism can definitely, man, you want to be optimistic, but oftentimes when there is actual adversity and things that it's going to be like maybe cause issues, that excessive optimism can can basically cause that person not to be a realist. You want to be logical, but also positive that things might work out, but you also have to be a realist. But it could be self-defeating, um, may prevent recognition of possible risk or real risk. So self-esteem is great, but sometimes excessive and not and unrealistic expectations can definitely blind us to like the real situation or the real risk that are around us. The cost of self-esteem can cause blindness to one's own incompetence. I've had so many students to say, "Oh my God, like I can't believe that I failed um, this exam. I had a low score," but they felt pretty smart, so a lot of them felt like they're overconfident, they didn't have to study. Self-serving bias is basically a readiness to perceive ourselves favorably. People accept more responsibility for those good deeds than bad. Most people see themselves as better than average. um, so they did some studies. So in Australia, 86% of people rate their job performance as above average and only 1% as below average. So people really see themselves in a favorable light. So it can cause self-serving bias. It talks about the two types of self-esteem. Defensive self-esteem is fragile, threatened by failure. It once it's knocked down, it kind of now it's more vulnerable. It feeds into anger and all that stuff. But secure self-esteem is less fragile, less contingent on those external things, and more likely to achieve better quality of life. These individuals probably have the ability to kind of fail and then still have confidence in their ability to recover. These are just two types. Figure out like which one you are, and sometimes we have to work on those things. Like I said, uh, probably in class this week, if you've already met with me, you have a discussion post this week based on your Curacy personality inventory that you took. Um, and we will have a discussion in class to pretty much answer the questions that you'll be answering during the discussion. We're doing a review in class this week. Please don't ask me for the review if you weren't in class. Just period. Don't do that. So that is the benefit of coming to class, but also making sure that you take the quiz for this week. And we have one more week of classes, so you only have to be there one more day after this week. If you've already attended, like just one more day, right? So the other Wednesday and Friday, you have two more classes before the semester is over. It ended so quickly. And yeah, so this week we're covering, personality. Personality and social psychology are my favorite chapters. They're so much fun. You learn so much about yourself, even when you've gone over and even with me teaching it so many times, you learn so much more about yourself and about the people around you. So yeah, it's pretty neat. So guys, if you have any questions or anything about um, the class as the semester is ending, please let me know. I'm always in my office from 8 to 5:30 every day in Stewart 233. So don't hesitate to stop by if you have any concerns. I'll be more than happy to help you. Have a good week. Be safe. Wear your mask. Take your vitamin C and all that good stuff. All right. I'll see you soon.